Hello, this is Lynn McCool, and today I'm going to be discussing using plain and persuasive style, rhetorical devices, voice, and tone. Style is about quality. It reflects your character by embodying the values, beliefs, and relationships you want to share with the readers. Good style involves choosing the right words and phrases, structuring sentences and paragraphs for clarity, using an appropriate tone, and adding a visual sense to the text. Style is classified into three levels. Plain style, which stresses clear wording and simple prose, used to instruct, teach, or present information. Persuasive style, used to influence people to accept ideas and take action, adds energy and vision to your writing and speaking. And grand style, which stresses eloquence. Only the first two, plain style and persuasive style, are used in technical writing, as grand style is considered too ornate for a technical document. Writing plain sentences. Before we begin writing plain sentences and talking about the difference between plain and persuasive style, we have to remind ourselves of the basic parts of the sentence. Every sentence needs a subject, a verb, and usually a complement. Remember, the subject is what the sentence is about, the verb is what the subject is doing, and the complement is what is being said about the subject. So let's start with 8 guidelines for plain sentences using grammar and syntax effectively and see how we can arrange sentences to create a plain style. The first guideline for plain sentences is that the subject of the sentence should be what the sentence is about. If readers can't identify subjects, they get confused. Here's an example of a very confusing sentence. 10 months after the Hartford project began, in which a team of our experts conducted close observations of management actions, our final conclusion is that the scarcity of monetary funds is at the basis of the inability of Hartford industries to appropriate resources to essential projects that have had the greatest necessity. This sentence is very long, and it's hard to even see where the subject might be in that sentence. Here's a revision of that sentence, and you can see in red here I've highlighted where the subject is. 10 months after the Hartford project began, our experts have concluded through close observations of management actions that the scarcity of monetary funds is at the basis of the inability of Hartford industries to appropriate resources to essential projects that have the greatest necessity. The subject is closer to the beginning of the sentence, but this sentence still is pretty confusing. Let's see if we can revise it again. This one's better. After a 10-month study, our experts, here's the subject again, and it's close to the beginning of the sentence, have concluded, here's our verb, that the scarcity of monetary funds is at the basis of the inability of Hartford industries to appropriate resources to essential projects that have the greatest necessity. But it's still a mouthful to read and say. Let's see if we can revise it one more time. This one is the best yet. After a 10-month study, our experts, here's the subject, concluded, verb, that Hartford Industries' budget shortfalls are limiting its support for priority projects. Complement. The second guideline for plain sentences is that the subject should be the doer in the sentence. In other words, active voice is easier to read and understand. The first example is not an example of active voice, it's an example of passive voice. On Saturday morning, the paperwork was completed in a timely fashion by Jim. Here we have this word paperwork that looks like it's doing the action of the verb was completed, but actually it's not. What the sentence should look like is like this one. On Saturday morning, Jim, who's the true subject of this sentence, completed the paperwork in a timely fashion. This is active voice, where the subject is the person doing the action of the verb, and it's in the correct spot in the sentence. The third guideline for plain sentences is that the verb should state what the doer is doing. Find the action and turn it into the verb of the sentence. The first sentence does this. The detective investigated the loss of the payroll. Here we have subject, verb, complement. But look at the next sentence. The detective conducted an investigation into the loss of the payroll. Now we've added an additional verb here, and we've turned our primary verb, investigated, into a noun. This helps to confuse the sentence. Look at the third example. The detective is the person who is conducting an investigation of the loss of the payroll. Again, we've added additional items into this sentence, but it doesn't make the sentence any clearer. In fact, it makes it more confusing because now we've added a whole another clause in there, and we've still taken that main verb, the thing that should be the verb in the sentence, and put it as a noun. So the fourth guideline for plain sentences is that the subject of the sentence should come early because the subject anchors the sentence because it tells readers what the sentence is about. Here's an example of a sentence that does not have a subject early in the sentence. If deciduous and evergreen trees experience yet another year of drought like the one observed in 1997, the entire Sandia Mountain ecosystem will be heavily damaged. We can see that actually the subject of this sentence is Sandia Mountain ecosystem, but it's not occurring towards the beginning of the sentence. Here's the sentence revised. The entire Sandia Mountain ecosystem will be heavily damaged if deciduous and evergreen trees experience yet another year of drought like the one observed in 1997. Now that the subject is in the early place in the sentence, it's much easier to understand. Fifth guideline is to eliminate nominalizations. Nominalizations are verbs and adjectives that have been turned into awkward nouns. First example, management has an expectation that the project will meet the deadline. This noun, expectation, really should be turned into its verb form for the sentence to be stronger and clearer. Management expects the project to meet the deadline. Sixth guideline is to avoid prepositional phrases. This doesn't mean that you have to remove all prepositional phrases, just get rid of the long chains of them. Here's an example of a sentence that has way too many prepositional phrases. The decline in the number of businesses owned by locals in the town of Artesia is a demonstration of the increasing hardship faced in rural communities in the Southwest. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 prepositional chains in that sentence. Let's look at the revision. Artesia's declining number of locally owned businesses demonstrates the increased hardship faced by southwestern rural communities. We've taken this number of prepositional phrases and reduced them down to just 2, and the sentence is much easier to read and much clearer. The seventh guideline is to eliminate redundancy in sentences. Redundancies use 2 or more words to do the work of one word and are often harder to understand. Our first example, we should collaborate together as a team. Since the word collaborate means to do something together, usually in a group of people, the second half of this sentence is redundant. So the sentence could just simply be stated, we should collaborate. The 8th guideline is to write sentences that are breathing length. Because if a sentence is too long, readers worry about when it will end rather than what you are saying. So keep your sentences a manageable length. Alright, now let's test your knowledge. What's wrong with this sentence? On Saturday morning, the paperwork was completed in a timely fashion by Jim. Is it A, the subject is not the doer in the sentence? B, the verb doesn't state the action? C, there are nominalizations? Or D, the sentence contains redundancies? Hopefully you said A, the subject is not the doer in the sentence, and so therefore the sentence was written in passive voice. Another good reason to use plain style is to think about what you need to do when you are writing for an international audience. And so plain style works well with intercultural style and the use of translation software. In intercultural style and translation software use, the technical writer needs to take good care to follow these basic guidelines. He or she should use basic sentences because the software tries to translate whole sentences rather than words, and the software has trouble with complex sentences. Use standard punctuation such as periods, commas, and question marks. Those are fine, but other marks spell trouble. Use consistent words. Use the same word to mean the same thing. Avoid metaphors, sayings, and cliches because such phrases require knowledge of the culture and the software won't know how to interpret it. And finally, remove any cultural, historical, or sports-related references because the software won't know what you mean if you include these references. When using translation software, make sure that you back-translate all of your text. That means that after you translate something into another language, translate it back into English. It will help you identify problems if it translates back into English in unexpected ways. Use spell checker on the original and translated texts. Spelling errors will often cause the software to guess at your intentions. Avoid words that have double meanings. Use words that have only one meaning so that the software doesn't have to guess at which meaning you want. Minimize jargon and acronyms. Software will guess about the meanings of jargon and acronyms as well. And finally, avoid puns or other plays on words, again because the software doesn't understand double meanings and they will translate strangely. Let's check your understanding again. Which is untrue of translation software? Is it A, it cannot interpret cultural references, B, it interprets word by word, C, cliches will not translate properly, or D, it shouldn't be used for important documents? Hopefully you said B, it interprets word by word. Next, let's look at the basic elements of a paragraph, its basic structure and organization. Remember that paragraphs begin with a topic sentence, which is a claim or statement that the rest of the paragraph is going to prove or support. Usually the topic sentence is in the first or second sentence of each paragraph. It sets a goal for the paragraph and tells the claim, and then the rest of the paragraph proves that claim. Readers pay the most attention to the first sentence in a paragraph. Other kinds of sentences that you'll find in a paragraph are something called a transition sentence, support sentences, and point sentences. Let me talk about each one. First, transition sentence makes a smooth bridge from one paragraph to the next. Support sentences contain examples, reasoning, facts, data, anecdotes, definitions, and descriptions. And point sentences restate the paragraph's main point toward the end of the paragraph. Another thing to think about is to align sentence subjects in the paragraph. To line up subjects, first ask yourself, what is the paragraph about? Then cut and paste words to restructure the sentences to line up on that subject. Let me show you how this might work. Here's an original sentence. The desert of Utah was where the Genesis capsule crashed today after a failure to open its parachutes. In order to line up the subjects, we could revise it to say, the Genesis capsule crashed in the Utah desert today after its parachutes failed to open. And we can see that it's much easier to read and understand. Here's another example. An anticipated 12-day loss of communication period was experienced by the Mars rover. Revised, the Mars rover experienced a 12-day loss of communication period. So you can see that the subject is coming early in the sentence, followed by the verb. Here's another one. In a finding that may one day help identify those at higher risk for alcoholism and depression, a study was written by scientists who say that they have identified a gene that appears to be linked to these diseases. We could revise that again so that the subject is coming early in the sentence. Scientists have identified a gene that appears to be linked to people at high risk for both alcoholism and depression. That's all I have for you right now on plain style. Look for the second screencast where I will detail the elements of persuasive style. Talk to you again soon.